I'm Arun Malhotra and I'm in ETAuto Unplugged. And today we'll be discussing in detail on a topic which is very close to automobile industry marketing. And I'm talking of rural marketing. And there's no better person to discuss this topic than Mr. Shashank Srivastava, who's Senior Executive Director Marketing Sales of Maruti Suzuki. Welcome, Shashank, to the show.
Thank you.
So, Shashank, we've known you as a person in the auto industry. We generally see you in the launches and TV studios. We sometimes see you in fashion shows, but here you are in a studio. We would like to know more about Shashank, starting from your school college days. What type of person were you? What were your aspirations, desires, and how your journey has evolved?
So I had that normal schooling in a Christian school. I went to St. Edmund's Campion, initially to St. Joseph's. And then I did my engineering, as in those days, if you were a reasonably good student, you are expected to be either an engineer or a doctor. Others have to do something else.
I'm sure you would have been a very good student.
Well, not really, but maybe in academics, maybe average, slightly above average, I would say.
You're being modest.
So I also did my electronics and telecommunication engineering. And at that time, I realized a lot of my friends used to want to go abroad for studies. And many of them did go for the US. That was the most desired destination in those days. And I was at that time, I remember, a lot more principled in that sense that if the government has invested so much in the education of people like me, so I said, no, we have to do something in the country itself. And IIMS was a very good opportunity to get into the next level of trying to be in business also, at the same time do something which is related to your good talent or skills. So I went to IIM Ahmedabad. Fortunately, I got through. I still wonder how I got through, but anyway, I got through. And I realized that it was not just about managing business, but also about some product or field where you were really interested in. And as a young boy, I remember I was very interested in automobiles, as most boys are. And we in our family, and there were very few families with cars during those days. I was fortunate that our family also had a vehicle. It was a Morris, I remember, and my father used to give me the task of filling up the water every day. You know, the radiator had there was no coolant in those days, so you had to fill up the radiator. So I used to do that in the garage. And I started at that time. I remember I was in just 6th or 7th class at that time. So must have been in that 13 years or sort of range. And I used to drive from the garage, and in front of the house, I used to park the car.
Only the house. I hope you didn't take it to the roads.
I did actually, but it's difficult for me to reveal here all the thing I did, because it's actually illegal to do so without a license. I used to do it. There was no traffic at that time, you know. Bhopal, small place. It's talking of 1976, 77, you know, that those days. My mother knew about it. Fortunately, he never told my father about this. I think he would have put a stop to it. But I was very keen. And that is the time when I decided that I should be in managing, helping in management of a business, but it has to be a product like automobile. And that's how Maruti Suzuki came. And at that time, it was, you know, just started. This is, I'm talking of 1989. And that is the time when I
your
joined.
Passion for coming into the car industry didn't come after college. Generally, it comes after placement. It came during your early school days.
Yes, it did. The product, obviously.
So, automobile is in your blood.
Yeah, you can say that. At least
रग में automobile घूम रहा है तब से.
हाँ, खून में कुछ वो हैं जिसमें ये रगों में ये घूम तो रहा है. और कई बार लोग बोलते थे, उस समय भी मेरी बहन बोलती थी कि आपके रगों में खून है या ऑयल है इसका, मोबिल ऑयल. लेकिन नहीं, ऐसा नहीं, बिकॉज व्हेन आई जॉइंड मारुति सुजुकी, इट वाज स्टिल अ वेरी you know, it's a small company.
Which year was that?
It was 89. Okay. And you know, at that time I remember when Maruti started 4 or 5 years before I joined it, the annual sale in the industry was just 50,000. Annual sale. 25-26,000 used to be the premier Padmini, and 20,000 used to be the ambassador at that time. And when I joined, Maruti was doing something like 85,000 cars annually. And that continued for some time, because the excise duty used to be very high, 60%, 65%, and obviously the industry was very small, and Maruti was the market leader at that time also, but really small volumes. And I remember we used to distribute samosas whenever the number crossed 600 a day. If the number crossed 600 vehicles in one day, yeah. So today we are doing like 6,000, 7,000.
So when you do 6,000, what do you distribute now?
Actually, we would go bankrupt if we were to distribute even samosas at 600 per day. But 600 per day is that thing. It used to be a big this thing. It is no longer so. We are doing 6,000 vehicles a day. But I remember those times, and after that the industry did develop. Of course, it could have developed even faster. But I think now we are the third largest thing. So that has been my journey. I have seen the ups and downs in the industry, and of course I'm quite proud of my association, obviously, because it does contribute a lot to the country's GDP, and that to me is a larger objective I have taken for as my contribution, which is that to do as much as for Maruti Suzuki, and hence for the auto industry, and hence for the overall the economy, and that I believe a larger objective is essential. If you really want to get into any business and do your best, it can't be from factors like I want more salary or I want more status, or you cannot do your best if you are in that path. So you have to have a larger objective, and I thought this was a good larger objective.
So two things which I get from you. One is कि आप में देशभक्ति की भावना भरी हुई थी, तब से शुरुआत से थी. You don't want to go abroad, you could easily gone abroad, but you thought make a career in India. Auto was an interest and passion which you had, which you pursued. And third thing is you believe in the theory of self-actualization. Money, material is there, but there is an inner voice should tell you that you have achieved something which you contributed to society, to the country, or to the industry.
जी बिल्कुल, बिल्कुल.
तो ये आपका योगदान.
शुरू से हम हब्बे वतन रहे हैं.
हब्बे वतन रहे हैं, देश प्रेमी रहे हैं, आप देश प्रेमी, which is there. So when we talking about rural market, when I entered the rural market, or when I heard rural market, my definition of rural market was defined by what I saw in Hindi films. Today, there are so many definitions of rural. If you ask to rural, if I get 5 people in a room and asking what is rural, they'll be different. I want to understand from you, what is rural in definition in the country, in the marketing or in the auto industry? Because इस पे बहुत ज़्यादा views हैं.
First, there's good news and there's also bad news in this respect.
Let's share the good news first. Or you want to share the bad news?
Bad news मैं पहले बताता हूँ.
चलिए
ये कि ये जो तजाद आप जिसकी बात कर रहे हैं, जो कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन है जो डेफिनेशन का, ये आज भी बरकरार है, आज भी मौजूद है. और
सुधार नहीं हुआ इसमें.
सुधार हो रहा है, लेकिन this improvement has happened, this confusion is there not only amongst companies and organizations, but even within the different departments in the government itself. मतलब सरकारी इदारों में भी ये तजाद जो है बरकरार है. हाँ, and I'll tell you why. I mean, I give you a small example. आपने सुना होगा डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ रूरल डेवलपमेंट, पंचायती राज. उनकी डेफिनेशन रूरल की है कि जहाँ पे रूरल बॉडीज हैं, लोकल बॉडीज हैं. 2.55 lakh gram panchayats. Then there are panchayat samitis, about 6,800 or so. And there are of course Zilla Parishads, which are 650. So वो उस in that context they define rural. But come to the Ministry of Home, which does the census, for example, and there the definition is anything that is not urban is rural. So what is urban? Urban is if the population more than 5,000, कोई भी रिहायशी इलाके में 5,000, density of 400 per square kilometer. And third is 75% of the male population should be engaged in non-agricultural
that becomes urban.
That is urban. बाकी rest is rural. अब come to RBI.
अभी
खत्म नहीं हुई है. अभी तो 3 ही बता रहा हूँ, और भी बताऊंगा. तो 3 तक ही हम उसको महदूद रखेंगे. या नहीं, मैं उतनी ही महदूद उसी तरह रखूंगा. लेकिन मैं बताना चाहता हूँ RBI की डेफिनेशन है कहीं भी 10,000 के ऊपर पॉपुलेशन है वो अर्बन है.
अच्छा 10,000
कोई
कॉस्ट
पॉपुलेशन और कौन क्या कर रहा है, कोई
लेना
वहाँ
देना
पे
नहीं है.
कोई लेना देना नहीं, 10,000 के ऊपर है तो वो है. Now come to what companies will do. Obviously, you can't follow all these definitions.
And you can't follow since they're already
Yeah,
contradicting each
yeah.
other. Or
So
they're-
the good news is that there seems to be some sort of a betterment and fine tuning of this definition as we are evolving in this field. And it is no different in automobile. Automobile में भी मैं आपको यहाँ पे मतलब ये इंकशाफ करूँगा नाजरीन के लिए कि there is I mean I'm going to reveal to the audience that our definition in Maruti Suzuki of rural itself has been evolving.
अच्छा.
And there is a reason for it. Because it's a evolving field. Pehle people used to say we have to look at urban areas because the penetration of cars even in urban areas in India is still very low. Still very low. The highest, by the way, is 160 in Chandigarh. Goa and Delhi follow close behind. But in many of the cities, it is very low. Compare it with, let's say, 900 in US or a 780 or 790 in Japan and even across Japan. Japan, some rural areas are there where the penetration is more than 1,000,
अच्छा.
which is that more than one car per person. You know, so हमारे केस में वो नहीं है. हम अभी भी 27-30 के दरमियान घूम रहे हैं. And in rural areas it was even less so. So as the market evolved, and as I was telling you, Indian market was just 50,000. That time car penetration was 1.6 per thousand. Now it is of course 27,
much
27. But it's still way away from what is the global benchmarks. And therefore we have also evolved. वो areas जो पहले अर्बन जो अर्बन रूरल डेफिनेशन में आते थे वो आज अर्बन में आने लगे हैं.
अच्छा.
फॉर एग्जांपल रायबरेली, आई गिव यू एन एग्जांपल. रायबरेली है. आप और एग्जांपल्स देखें आसपास के भी, ऐसे रेवाड़ी है. पहले बिल्कुल उसको गांव माना जाता था. आज हम उसकी काउंटिंग रेवाड़ी की जो सेल है उसको हम रूरल नहीं मानते हैं क्योंकि वो तो वहां जाएंगे आप तो आप देखेंगे इट इज एज यू नो.
इसमें इवॉल्व हो रही है साथ में.
इवॉल्व हो रही है तो पहली चीज तो एक गुड न्यूज है वैसे मेरे हिसाब से.
Is the government also evolving its definition or the industry is evolving its definition?
I think government definitions remain more or less those three constant because their purpose is different. But for business purposes, since the business itself is evolving, our definition also evolved. And we are using a mix coming to the point of what is rural for Maruti Suzuki. So it's a mix. We are considering population. We are also having pin code wise tracking.
Which is very scientific.
Yeah, which is scientific. And we have rural outlets. We have e-outlets, the emerging market outlets, depending on the potential of cars, which is also dependent on how many two-wheelers are sold, how many vehicles are there actually registered in that area, what is the white goods sale, population, the occupation, and so on. So we have made a definition, and sales in these areas we consider that rural. और अब जब रूरल आउटलेट बनाए हैं तो उसमें से जो भी सेल होता है, जो हमारे वहाँ के जो सेल्स एग्जीक्यूटिव्स हैं उनको RDSEs बोलते हैं, रूरल डेवलपमेंट सेल्स एग्जीक्यूटिव. वो जो सेल करते हैं उसको हम रूरल मानते हैं. और आज की तारीख में जो है 43% के करीब जो है वो है. और यही डेफिनेशन अगर हम इंडस्ट्री पे लगाएं, ऑफ कोर्स डिफरेंट कंपनीज हैव डिफरेंट डेफिनेशन, सो अदर.
पर इस इंडस्ट्री में आप
बैड न्यूज़ है वो.
नहीं मिलाना नहीं चाहते कि इंडस्ट्री एक डेफिनेशन इमर्ज हो.
हाँ देखिए, तो हमने ना एक एक्सरसाइज करी थी जो वी फाउंड दैट करीब 28% इज द रूरल सेल. हमारे लिए ज़्यादा है बाय आवर डेफिनेशन. और चूँकि मारुति 43 है और ओवरऑल अगर 28 है तो इसका मतलब जो बाकी कंपनीज हैं उनका करीब 18-20% के करीब रूरल में सेल होगा. दैट मे बी नॉट ऑल कंपनीज आर सो देयरफॉर कीन to see the exact data regarding the rural urban divide because it may not matter so much. But for us, especially in some models, it is becoming very important, and overall 43% is a pretty large. In fact, there are some models which sell more in rural areas than urban areas.
That's very interesting. So two things very interesting you told me. One is the rural of the past may not be the rural of today. So the big challenge would be that if you have to compare data over years, it's difficult because it's moving. You have to use an advanced mathematical formula which only people like you can use because you are mathematically very strong. That's what I hear from people and what I've seen also. Second, which you're saying is there would be something emerging which is neither rural nor urban. People are calling this definition urban. ये अभी इस परिभाषा में कहीं आता है urban?
जी, उसको जैसे हम emerging outlet जो मैंने जिक्र किया, वो शायद उसमें आता है, उसके दायरे में आता है, क्योंकि ऐसे कई एरियाज हैं जहाँ पे पार्टली रूरल पार्टली अर्बन है. जैसे मानेसर है, मानेसर का कुछ हिस्सा तो बड़ा अर्बन कैटेगरी में आता है. आपने देखा होगा मल्टी स्टोरी बिल्डिंग, वहाँ इंडस्ट्रियल वर्कर्स हैं, हमारे मैनेजर्स भी वहाँ पे, बड़े सारे डेवलपमेंट हो गया इंडस्ट्री का. लेकिन उसके साथ आगे जाते ही कुछ एरियाज ऐसे हैं जहाँ पे बिल्कुल आपको कच्चे मकान और ये सब भी दिखेंगे, जहाँ खेती होती है और इस तरह से बहुत है. तो वहाँ पे इस तरह के ही इलाकों को पीपल से इट्स ए रूरल प्लस अर्बन, सो urban rural or rural or whatever name they call it. So it is that which
so
is
one
creating the
caveat I'm
confusion.
putting, you have named 3 towns in your discussion regarding rural: Manesar, Rewari, Raebareli, and you are a pan India company. तो कुछ अगले examples आपको beyond north जाना पड़ेगा.
जी बिल्कुल.
So that's
बिल्कुल.
that's a caveat I'm just putting across.
बिल्कुल.
But very interesting which you said is how the rural has emerged. Now, when did you? I mean, you would have visited as a small boy or in a school, college, some rural areas, but that would be from a different lens. But when the first time you visited rural market, what did you see? I mean, if I go to ground zero, Shashank Srivastava reporting from ground zero on first day of the rural market or first few days, क्या उसमें सीनरी थी?
देखिए, आई वुड से दैट जब मैं छोटा था और गांव में भी गया हूँ.
गए हो पर रहे नहीं हो ना?
रहे नहीं हैं, लेकिन गए जरूर हैं. और हम समर हॉलीडेज में जैसे हम अपने नानी के घर जाते थे, वो पीलीभीत में रहती थी.
अच्छा.
पीलीभीत बरेली के पास एक
50 किलोमीटर है शायद बरेली से.
हाँ, करीब 46 किलोमीटर है. और वो एक छोटा इलाका है. उससे भी छोटी जगह पे हम जाते थे, क्योंकि हमारे नाना के जो परिवार था वो वहाँ पे बीसलपुर करके एक जगह है, विच इज अबाउट another 60 किलोमीटर.
That would be तहसील.
अब वहाँ, हाँ, तहसील. तो वहाँ पे हम रहते थे, पूरे दिन रहते थे, कई बार तो लगातार.
More as a tourist.
नॉट एज ए टूरिस्ट, बिकॉज वहाँ पे वो थे उनके गांव में जैसे होते हैं वो खेत और बाग होते हैं. तो वहाँ पे आम खाने के लिए,
तो आम खाने के
टूरिस्ट क्यों बोलेंगे? आम खाना टूरिस्ट नहीं कहते हैं, टूरिस्ट आम खाता है.
शहर में भी आम खाते हैं.
हाँ, बट जैसे फार्मिंग होती थी, और वो जो मंजर था वो बिल्कुल वही था जो आपने फिल्मों में जिक्र किया था. वही खेती और वही मतलब कच्चे मकान और इस तरह का जो था. तो वो इमेज मेरे में बड़ी स्ट्रांग थी. And I did not visit the rural market for a long time, even after coming to Maruti.
Okay.
Because we were only thinking of penetration in urban areas. Okay. Remember, Maruti Suzuki had just 57 dealerships till 1995. 57 places we were there. Then after 1995, we started the real expansion. By 2000, we were in 100 cities. Today, if you ask me, we have outlets, ETAutos and our outlets covering 2,700 cities and towns.
Which is like 4 times the number of districts in the country.
और अब हम डिजिटल भी बोलते हैं कि डिजिटल में हमारे पास 9,000 ऐसे डिजिटल शोरूम्स हैं. तो अब now it has become different. So the real interest for us started coming when the urban penetration reached a certain level.
What did you see there?
हाँ, तो it was quite different from what I used to see earlier on. There was certainly much more development, and I think that is because the income levels for the rural has drastically increased.
Which year was that when you?
2000 मेरे ख्याल में 2004, 5, 2004, 5 के टाइम पे.
So काफी साल you were in Maruti Suzuki. You didn't visit rural markets, or your assignment was not with rural.
Yes, because we were trying to penetrate as much as possible. We didn't have dealership even in cities. I was just telling you. So now that we went to and we saw that we need to. This was a good competitive edge which Maruti Suzuki can have, by going into areas where others were not there. And that is what we started doing. And I was telling you, we have now about 2,780 cities and towns which we are covering, including emerging outlets, so e-outlets and then the rural outlets. And now we have what is called MSSP, which is Maruti Suzuki Sales and Service Point, where you can just have one single bay, just one small room for this thing, and you can have a display on a thing because you don't stock vehicles there. तो अब हम और deep जा रहे हैं. और मारुति सुजुकी का एक ये बड़ा strong competitive advantage, and that is what the journey has been for me. Once we realize, one of the good things is
Potential.
after we realize there is a potential, there is possibility and a competitive edge, we went in it in a big way.
I can totally resonate with you.
And from 2007 onwards, by the way, the rural markets growth, of course, the definition I'm saying, whatever has been the definition on that year, the rural market growth has been higher than urban growth in every year except 2013. Every year it has been
higher. This you would say
higher.
is beyond auto industry or is limited to
I'm talking of auto industry. मेरा सारा डेटा जो मैं यहाँ पे अदद-ओ-शुमारी यहाँ पे जो
एंड ऑटो में भी फोर व्हीलर इंडस्ट्री या टू व्हीलर को भी मिला रहे हैं ट्रैक्टर को उसमें?
टू व्हीलर का तो मेरे को उतना इल्म नहीं है, लेकिन जो फोर
व्हीलर की बात कर रहे हैं, पैसेंजर फोर व्हीलर की बात कर रहे हैं, so that's something which is there. Now you know, when you talk of 2004, because I was exposed to that time, I was in Maruti that time. So a lot of changes would have happened. There would be changes regarding socio-economic, purchasing decision, government's investments, financing. तो बड़े-बड़े changes जो हुए हैं इस market में, which has made changes. From your perspective, what were the changes and what time it happened? Which कई बार होते हैं inflection point होते हैं वो changes. कुछ changes तो चलते रहते हैं with time, पर कुछ होता है ये घट गया, इस घटने से because this happened, this really triggered off something, positive or negative it will be.
देखिए मेरे ख्याल में there are four big changes which I can see between that early times and when we actually went into it in a big way. One is rural incomes have gone up. I think the per capita rural income, the growth rate is much faster than urban, even though it is less in absolute terms.
But a lot of people would say कि per capita has gone up, but is it evenly distributed?
हाँ, तो we'll come to that. But एक चीज है कि एक economic activity वहाँ पे बड़ी है, और अगर उसके statistics दें, of course there is statistics there, but maybe
there can be no two opinion on that.
Correct. So वो बड़ी है. Agriculture dependence थोड़ी कम हुई है. So people who were engaged in agriculture were I think 41-42%. Now it is about 28-27%. एक वो economic activity. दूसरा मैंने देखा कि वहाँ पे इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का डेवलपमेंट जबरदस्त हुआ है. अगर आप रोड की ही बात करें तो रोड का जो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का है, जो कि जिसपे काफ़ी हद तक ऑटोमोबाइल सेल मशरूत है, इट्स डिपेंडेंट ऑन दैट. आई थिंक वी हैव सीन अ ह्यूज चेंज. द कनेक्टिविटी हैज़ गॉन अप ड्रास्टिकली. एंड अर्लियर ऑफ कोर्स पीपल यूज्ड टू ट्रांसपोर्ट बिटवीन विलेजेस बाय tractors. The number one usage of tractors in India at that time was people transportation, not farming. It was for transportation of people. That has changed. तीसरा मैंने देखा एक financing से related. Earlier people used to, and that was also typical, मेरा गांव मेरा देश, वहाँ पे जो गांव का साहूकार जो lend करता था कि वो
बिल्कुल पठानी rate और interest होता 30% और कभी वापस नहीं कर पाता था.
जो ब्याज की जो वो रहता था वो काफी ऊंची रहती थी. तो वो सब बदल गया है, because at that time there was no organized finance. I think now it is a very organized finance. The number of people. When
did it start happening, this organized
finance? I think I would say it happened sometime 2010, 11, and then accelerated 14, 15
So now you have all types of finance companies, yes. Private banks.
In fact, आपको एक बता दूं, एक ये कि हम उस दिन आप ये डेटा देख रहे थे, you have rural में ऑटो का हमारे लिए फाइनेंसिंग का जो पेनिट्रेशन है वो 82% है, अर्बन में 79 है.
अच्छा, rural is more than urban.
More than
that's
of course at different rates.
नहीं, rates may be different, but rates है, which is
बिल्कुल. और चौथी चीज जो मैं कहता हूँ जिससे एक बहुत जबरदस्त बदलाव आया है और तब्दीली कह सकते हो आप जिसको सही मायने में, वो ये है कि डिजिटल एस्पेक्ट में रूरल हैज एक्चुअली आल्सो बीन, आई वुड से, टेकिंग लीप्स एंड बाउंड्स. In fact, number of internet users in India and the penetration of internet users in India is 70%. आधा जो है, it is actually slightly more in rural than in urban. And now that changes the equation. Whether it is in terms of their psychographic, in their knowledge about the current happenings, about the products, about different aspects of business, the process in which they buy, they research about the products. I think that is becoming a sea change. Has changed hugely over these last, I would say, last 4 years or 5 years.
Awareness, aspiration, affordability, तीनों का एक संगम बनना शुरू हो गया है, which is such a virtuous cycle. Shashank, there are a lot of conceptions about rural marketing and rural markets. From your perspective, has it happened any time that you had some preconceived notions or something in your mind with regard to rural market, but when you went to ground or when you were faced with the reality, it was totally different? Can you think of an incident like this?
Yeah, actually, I can relate several such incidents, and some of them shocking. I think.
Shocking?
Yes, yes, because it's quite different from what one was thinking about a particular place. For example, very recently, I had gone for attending a local event, auto event, in a village which was about 60 kilometers from Imphal in Manipur, and I'm quite fond of attending such events. It always makes me connect with the local people better. So when I went there, and I thought it would be that usual stuff you see, you have those local dances, and you have those generally people, the panchayat people coming, and some family members, etc. But to my surprise, when the event started, it started with a music band, and that was a Western music band. And I was just wondering, this looks like South Bombay or Central Delhi, and how is it that these people are having? But then I realized that is the music that is prevalent and liked there. That is the type of entertainment they were looking at. So to me it was like quite a surprise, and I did it did remind me, of course, that India is a very diverse place, geographically very spread, and different areas have different likes and dislikes and forms of entertainment and so on.
Absolutely right. Anything else which you remember which was also very different from a practice? Generally, we have processes in companies, we say, okay, we've done it in bigger cities, let's go to the next level of towns, smaller towns. Anything like that which when you went into there?
Yes, as I said, several incidents have made me more humble.
Humble, but you're already a humble person, I thought.
Because of these incidents, I've become humble. There was, this was I think 2010, 11 types.
More than a decade
yes,
back.
yes. And at that time, we were having a lot of research data on how test drives help conversions better, and if you want to have lead conversion faster, then you have to give test drive to vehicle. And there are reams of research data available with us on this thing. So as happens, we go there and we have this data, and we say, I want to see what percentage of people do test drive here. And it's a small area, it's a rural area. So the local guys tell me, we don't like test drives. So I was a little surprised, how is it possible? Research showing, of course, research is all done in urban areas. And then people told us that, the test drive comes last.
Last?
Yeah, it is not as if we are trying 5-7 cars. By the way, the pre-decided purchase is very high in the rural areas. And the reason I found out was that if you take a test drive and the padosi comes to know about it, and they look at it, and the word goes around very fast that and then there is a pressure on that person to buy the car. And so if you are in a slightly undecided state, please don't think that a test drive is the best solution. Of course, things are changing now, because what I'm relating in 2010, but it still holds. And that was also something which I was feeling, here all my research and data and all analysis is, comes to nothing. But it was a reality. And that's something which I had to accept.
A different principle.
Absolutely. And in fact, another big incident which comes to my mind is where, it was a place near Sihor. It's in a town in Madhya Pradesh. On the way to, when you're going from Bhopal to Indore, there's this a village near that. So our showroom manager is there, and he's a guy and he's telling me this story. He says, I had a very disciplined outlook, and I used to get all my executives, sales executives, report at 9 o'clock. We decide what is to be done, then we go. And there are these two guys who never came on time. In fact, so I called them once, and this is the showroom guy who is relating, the manager who is relating me this story. And he says, मैंने इनको बुलाया, मैंने कहा ये नहीं चलेगा यहाँ पे, 9 बजे मतलब 9 बजे यहाँ आना चलेगा. ये गांव का मतलब ये नहीं है कि आप लोग 9 बजे नहीं आ सकते. हाँ, ये आपको ये सीखना पड़ेगा. टाइम मतलब टाइम, ये शहरों में तो ये ज़रूरी है और ये अंदाज ही ये होता है. So they said they can't come at 9, and then and he found out that because they were resting in that period, and when they were further, he was about to, he says, dismiss those two guys, termination, क्योंकि उन्होंने कहा ये बेकार हैं. लेकिन जब वो डेटा देखा कि वो सबसे ज़्यादा गाड़ी बेचते थे, तो ये हुआ कि भाई हैरानी हुई कि ये कैसे बेचते हैं गाड़ी ज़्यादा. तो पता चला कि these guys told them that the best time to approach the customer was between 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the morning. And he says ki this was their success mantra, and therefore they, after coming back and getting ready 9 o'clock, they were resting, and therefore they never came. And of course they were never terminated, but it was a big insight for me specifically when this incident was related. That this is incredible, I would
very
say.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you don't have to have fixed time about timings or thing.
So what you are telling me is there is a concept of unity in diversity. India is so diverse a country, you cannot have a fixed method for the entire country. It can behave differently.
Absolutely.
East from north, northeast from south or west is there. And second thing which you said, there's an old saying, think global but act local. So you may have the principles right.
Absolutely.
But you need to see whether the principles are relevant to that market, to that situation, and you have to implement it accordingly.
Absolutely.
Don't blindly follow it.
Absolutely.
So that is something which comes out very, very sharply and clearly. Other thing which I was wanted to know is, there are generally the people say rural market, the decision is not made by the individual customer. It is made by the influencers in that rural area who tell him what to buy and what not to buy. Is that true, and how is it changing with time?
So I think it's largely true that really the brands which do well, like Maruti Suzuki, they are, you first have to earn the trust. And trust, I believe, is the biggest differentiator in rural areas for a brand. It is not about the product, it is not about even the services, it is about the trust. And it translates into many things. Like, अगर local sales executive है, जिसको जहाँ वहाँ के लोग जानते हैं, वो उसको ज़्यादा trust करेंगे. So you have to be mindful of the fact that it is not about the salesman knowledge or thing. First hurdle is that he has to be trustworthy. He has to be somebody who comes there often. It's not as if you come once in a while like it happens in urban areas. Showroom से एक बार आ गए उसके बाद you know, or every time you go to the showroom you will have a new person maybe interacting with you. वहाँ पे ऐसा नहीं है. But there are some things which are changing. So trust is one thing, and the trust earlier used to be generally with some few people. Like if the panchayat head says कि ऐसे करना है तो वैसे होना है, or some elder people or some generally who are influential in every way, whether it is casting your vote to making a product choice, they were the same people. But now we have seen that while this concept still remains, the influencers are changing. So you have people who veto decisions. They could still be the same, but the influencers can be different. And especially if you see in the digital world, in the virtual world, the influencers now are playing also a major role. Again, it's a matter of trust, and these influencers are not some celebrities. That's the other mistake which we often make, is to say हमारे को रणबीर सिंह जो है वो करेगा. वहाँ local influencers who may not even be celebrities outside, but within they have a more influencing power. So now the influencers are a little different from the veto ones. Earlier the veto guys and the influencers were all the same. So ये थोड़ा सा तब्दीली आई है, लेकिन basically जो बुनियादी वो है वो वहीं का वहीं मौजूद है.
दूसरा, how much is the impact of Google Baba in influencing now? Because everybody's got a cell phone, everybody can get information. तो Google Baba का कितना impact है for decision making?
हाँ, देखिए उसका इन्फ्लुएंस तो बढ़ गया है. As I was telling you, internet users in India, 70% of the Indians have use internet. Half and half है. In fact, rural is slightly higher, as I just mentioned. तो वहाँ पे जो research हो रही है प्री बाइंग की, वो काफ़ी बढ़ गई है रूरल एरियाज में भी. सो इट इज़ नो लॉन्गर अबाउट somebody just telling कि यही लेनी है गाड़ी है. देयर आर यंग पीपल, टेक सेवी people who know thing, and they are in that respect, that divide between rural and urban has actually come down still exists, but it has come down drastically thanks to the Baba and
Google Baba
and other this thing information providers. But हाँ influence बढ़ गया इनका और एक तरह से अच्छी बात भी है because now I think more informed decisions are being made. But largely the undercurrent still remains that the trust has to be built in. So it is not an overnight a brand can go and say yeah this is it.
Another one impression people had that when you had products, the upper end variants sell in cities, the lower end or the base models sell in smaller towns or upcountry areas. Is that concept has changed or is it totally, or there is some merit to it?
I would say it has reduced hugely.
Acha.
Yeah. पहले क्या था, you could just predict that these models will not sell in the rural areas. Like some of our higher end models at that time, Baleno होती थी, एक three box Baleno होती थी, या steam होती थी. The sale in rural areas were very limited. But today I can say that most of the products, the pattern of model wise choice is roughly similar. There are of course still, it's not completely disappeared. For example, in our smaller category, the Alto, the Espresso, a larger percentage of the thing happens in rural areas. So in that sense you can see some divide. But generally speaking, it's a myth that some top end models only get sold in rural urban areas and only the lower end. That I think is a myth.
Another conception about rural market is that the seasonality of sale is very skewed in rural markets. Either in the money from the crops comes or there is festivals there, and in inauspicious periods so kuch tara doob jata hai, it's totally out, which still is followed in somewhere in north. But is the skew so clear? That means people used to say 5 months I can close my shop, kuch nahi hone wala, and 3 months I have to have double the manpower.
Yeah, so that I think is no longer true. Clearly there is seasonality. For example, when you have the harvesting of crops, clearly there is more cash in the economy and therefore that influences the purchase of products. But it is no longer the thing which you were just mentioning. Ki, there are auspicious periods, there are inauspicious.
Like
that happens
city,
in the cities also.
Achha,
Maybe more strongly followed in rural areas, but not that complete shutting down in an auspicious period and so just a shadi ka season and that you still find those things. That varies from region to region. Depending on the type of development.
That also
economies.
is a pan-India, you can't have a pan-India
Yes,
philosophy.
so you can't say all rural in all areas or follow this pattern, maybe that's not correct. But it has significantly, I think, changed from those days when you could shut down shop for some period of time and you won't lose any sale. Now, of course, you do see sales happening in auspicious period, just as you have high sales in auspicious period.
This concept that one is the influencers, the other is a family decision, because male member is paying the money, will drive the vehicle. So that person had nearly 100% decision making ability based on the influence. Now is that changing because there are children also, there are female women also? Is the decision making pattern within the family changing, or is it still virtually the same?
Again, I would say it's changing. Especially I see the next generation, irrespective of the gender, the next generation seems to be more influential, even in decisions, especially in decisions like the purchase of automobile. I remember, for example, one case which to me was particularly striking. This boy from some sports quota or something, he was studying in Bangalore. And in Shimoga, there was a village thing. So the father wanted to buy the car, and in that process, the son came from Bangalore because he obviously had the father had a much more confidence in what the boy knew because he was having a higher education or he was living in a city. So that sort of sense has come now. And I think it is irrespective of the gender, which means that if the older generation generally also accept that if a girl is studying higher education, so obviously she will know more is what the thinking is.
So
and
that clear-cut male divide, male chauvinistic
is
society
not there.
is going down.
Yeah.
So it is based on awareness, education.
Exposure, and things like that.
Absolutely. Now coming, you said a very interesting thing that the financing percentage penetration in rural is more than urban. And although it's quite a startling fact, because whatever one might say, one say कि in lot of income in the rural areas they don't have clear ITRs or salary slips or thing. How does this happen? Now I'm thinking from the perspective of customer, because some time it was thought that it's sinful to buy something on loan, to the concept of that, how do you manage that income which generates in a different manner? So how is it happening?
So I think there are multiple factors, including starting from the fact that there is now a diversity of economy, and we mentioned that at the beginning of this discussion, how purely from agrarian economy it is becoming more diverse. So you do have some service sectors also. You have more people coming in terms of when the development happens, more doctors or more teachers or so that is becoming more diverse. So that drives also different thought process. Secondly, I think in terms of banking, we have seen, especially in the recent past, a lot of people have they are doing banking also, and that also brings in some sort of a change in the mindset. Things like education, or even digitalization, we were mentioning how exposure to information and to other areas is helping. So all these factors, I believe, is leading to the fact that now they are more bankable or financiable.
So, but they cannot show the income in the conventional form. So that
which I think most of the financial institutions are realizing.
So what do they use?
And they are, no, you have many, of course, parameters by which you can think. Interest rates, to be sure, are a little higher, especially if you have NBFCs, for example. You have no income proof consumers also, in urban areas also, but more so in the rural areas. So you have proxy parameters by which they make a measurement of the ability of them to pay. Including you have now financial products which are also built to suit such thing. For example, in harvesting time, you could have a balloon, for example, or you have a spike in the EMIs at that time, deferred EMIs and things like that. So now the NBFCs...
Do the nationalized bank work on that for model now, or is only the NBFC?
I have seen largely NBFCs, but in terms of penetration of the availability of finance, some of these public sector banks are really good.
So that's again a myth. Public sector banks are slow to act on.
No, in fact, from Maruti Suzuki perspective, I remember in the early 2000s, our MD, Mr. Khattar at that time, used to literally have multiple meetings with officials of the public sector bank, asking them if they can finance. And today, these people have the highest finance penetration in the portfolio.
You are in a seller's market as far as, or you are in a buyer's market.
I mean, it's a thing, but the point is that it has changed dramatically.
Availability is that there's a lot of flexibility. So they've adjusted more to the ground reality.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is driving it. Now there are, a lot of things which have happened in the country, a lot of government unique projects which are launched. There were projects before even, but projects which are launched now. Then there are self-help groups, then there are NGOs, then there are companies spending on CSR, then there are even startups which are more rural. So how all these changes, I mean, they would have happened over time. Just get your perspective. How will these changes influence the market?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the major factors which is sort of leading the change in market behavior and the marketing approach. Whether you talk of NGOs and in fact even government interventions, whether it is in terms of banking area, whether even in infrastructure development, which also we discussed in the early part of our discussions. So all these factors have sort of made it closer to the urban-rural divide has become a little shrunk, and all these factors that you mentioned and what I have added, I think that has led to rural markets being developing at a very rapid rate now, and having some sort of a thread of nature which is similar to the urban areas. It's not getting, they have not got there yet, but it appears that there is a convergence which is happening.
One thing we were told in the early part of my career, and it might be yours also, that the one way to understand rural market is managed by walking around or wandering around. But there are young professionals who say that everything is available on social media, every data, information, video. So why need to sweat it out on the market to understand the market? And they have a very strong point on this. What is your advice or perspective on this point?
So I have looked at this with a very open.
And I'm taking people with today's generation.
Yes. So because my generation will always be criticized that you criticize the younger generation. So I have looked at it with a very open mind, and considering all aspects as open as I think I can be, and looking at all aspects. But I think this thought is not correct, and probably will not help in marketing to rural areas. So if you think everything is available at the click of a button on the internet or social media and all, it's simply.
How do you change people's mind on that aspect?
So if you somehow make them go around and then they can see the reality, and I did that in my own way. Of course, not with relation to internet or social media. In my times, I gave you those incidents. So it's very humbling, and also you suddenly realize that the dynamics can be very different. And the young people, and that's the message I would like to give, that I'm not being critical of the young generation. As I said, I'm trying to be, I have looked at it with a very open mind, but I have come to a conclusion which I think I'm correct, which is unless you go around and visit and feel the market, it is difficult to, you will otherwise be living in an illusionary world supported with some social media inputs, which could be not equally elusive, but in the terms of illusion, but partly so, because what you see is in the social media can be quite different. And I think now, at least in Maruti Suzuki, we have made it compulsory for our sales executives, for our TSMs, the territory sales managers, to actually go and report, and they have now concluded it's right. You have to visit.
Is it by change of heart or is it by dictate?
So it's a mix of two. I think first it is a dictate, and slowly once they feel the thing, then the heart changes, and then it becomes easy. Because then you don't have to do any.
So first, there's an inflection point as well.
There is an inflection point, and then obviously it builds on itself. Yeah.
The other thing which a lot of people say is market leaders have an inherent advantage, because to gain brand loyalty is a challenge. But once you gain brand loyalty, you can sit on that brand loyalty like Jagirdar, because anybody, a new player to come in and get that customer to switch brands is very difficult. Is that true?
I think to the extent that you can build trust, you can say that that is it. But I think it is not about Jagidari or longevity.
Jagidari would work.
Jagidari, same thing would happen. What is happening to Jagidari now? Which will disappear after it has disappeared a lot and it's disappearing. So same thing can happen to brands. I think the differentiating factor I mentioned is trust. So it is not the longevity alone. You could actually become more distrustful with longevity, which can be even more dangerous. So a new brand which comes in is like it's sort of a neutral where you haven't made up. So
if you have made mistakes,
so you have to be mindful of the fact that if some people feel that it doesn't matter. Rural market mein you can
get away with anything.
It's not true. It's actually once they form their mind, they are pre-decided also in terms of purchase, basically on this fact of trust and your satisfaction levels. And if that's not happening, it's very difficult in rural market. It's not an easy market, by the way.
A lot of people say that emotional connect and empathy are very important points of rural. So you agree with that, and you could give some interesting insight how you find that if you are able to establish an emotional connect or empathy with a customer, your brand journey or your lifetime value of customer is larger. Anything interesting comes to your mind from that point perspective?
So first, to put in perspective, I think emotion and empathy, this is essential for all purchases, irrespective of whether it's rural or urban. So that's a marketing reality. You have to, it's a good principle, unless you are empathetic with the consumers, you will never get it, irrespective of the area, country or product. Having said that, there is something to be said more about this for the rural areas. One example comes to my mind. And that is also probably, you can say, an influencing factor, building up of that emotion. I know of a family. It's in Haryana, so I've given many examples of Haryana, but I've also given you examples of Northeast and Madhya Pradesh and Karnataka. But here I like to, because that's one thing which it strikes to me immediately, which is there is this one customer who said that he was not able to attend the marriage function of some of his relatives because they stayed in not distant, but in a village, not very far, but they were waiting for a transport which did not come on that day.
Okay.
So they were all, the family was
They're
ready.
all ready to go to the function.
And the wife told him that this is something which you should look at, to have an alternate mode. He has bought an Alto, and when I met him last time, and he's a favorite of mine because he is actually better than our salespeople there. He sells more vehicles for us, and he keeps giving this example again and again that this happened to him. And that his wife is very happy because, while that incident happened once, the wife is happy because now she can go not only for weddings but to other, generally in other family functions, etc. So that's also something which I feel the wife actually was an influencer, but this incident also is emotional because, it has that connect that you couldn't go and attend your, family function, and that I think has made a big impression on that man. And as I said, he has sold more vehicles for Maruti Suzuki in that village than
so
our.
It touches heart.
Yes,
the thing.
yes.
The other thing is about distribution. A lot of people say, that auto industry is too straitjacketed in distribution, dealer, sub-dealer, this thing. Whereas the consumer durable industry has followed a different. They may compete at the front end, but the back end they service together. The same person can wear 3 different type coats at different time and come to service your refrigerator, your television or AC. Is it something, a reality, it can happen in the auto industry, or you think everybody has to mend in his own ways? And clearly for a market leader it's advantageous, because if you do it, the others gain more.
Yeah, so if you're referring to the after sales, for example.
After sales, I'm referring to, because that creates the type of infrastructure required, investment required, is much more difficult than from the sales part of it.
And I think we realized that a long time back, because especially for products like automobile, it's a lifelong, or it's a long time that you keep the
long-term
product.
relationship.
Yes. And therefore, it is not just about buying the product, but again, it's not like a toothpaste से कि वो बोलेगा यार close up नहीं है तो Colgate दे दे या Colgate नहीं है तो कुछ और दे दे. It's not like that. So it's a long-term relationship, and you have to do insurance every year. Then you have to visit the service center and so on. So very long time back. In fact, in the early 90s, we realized this, that service is going to be very important. So people might come in those times from the small cities to the main city, buy the product, but they have to use it there. So what happens to their after sales services? So we realized that. So we started the concept called MAS, which is Maruti Authorized Service Stations. At that time, nobody was there in the industry who did, but we realized that after sales is a very important aspect for their satisfaction level, and hence to build trust and loyalty, all that thing which we discussed. Therefore, masses came into picture, and now we are also getting into what is known MSSP, where you have a single bay workshop in very small areas, and people would like to do that. By the way, there is a island in the world's largest island in a river is in Assam, in India, where there are vehicles where periodically we send our service on wheels. So we send it on in the rafts. So it goes periodically, stations in this island. All the vehicles in the island, they come and they serve in that period, and then this thing is taken back in the boat, the raft. So this is the extent which we are,
So service in wheels has an importance there, which is there.
Absolutely.
Not only in Assam, in other places also.
Other service of wheel, if suppose somebody wants to think, you just periodically, we have this thing where periodically the service of wheel, they go periodically to villages on a particular route. And by the way, and whoever has a requirement, but this is not just about service. We are doing it for even our Nexa products. We have showroom on wheels, where we go and park the vehicle and we show our products and everything. So we are trying to get into the smallest areas.
So now my objective is to put you in the hot seat. It is around for devil's advocate. You are a market leader. You done as a market leader. and heading that company, you've done a great job. Now put yourself out of the market leader slot and wear the hat of a market challenger. What is, if you were to act as a market challenger and you had to fight the market leader in the auto, what would you do? Now you're only speaking the voice of the market challenger because you're wearing that hat.
Yeah.
I hope the question is clear.
Yeah. It is clear to me. Although I'm just wondering which is the more hot seat, whether it is being the leader or the challenger.
For rural area, the challenger is a more
It's a more hot
more,
seat.
more hot seat, which is the more challenging. So I just want to understand from you.
Yeah. So I think one of the advantages which challengers would have is
What they should do. What is the advice you would give them?
All the pros and cons of marketing elements are known from the experiences of the market leader. We mentioned some of them already. For example, don't try to presuppose others who have done it, like Maruti Suzuki has done it in some occasions. They would have suffered for it. Build trust, build your network. These are known. Use local language, the vernacular. Don't try to get into those.
Give some advice to them which it is not known in common parlance.
Of course, one thing is you have to establish a good network.
That takes time. I mean, give me a...
Yes. So, if the challenger wants to know a shortcut method, I'm afraid there is none.
There is none.
That is an advice I can give immediately.
Achha,
there is no shortcut.
But okay, from medium term, what is the two top advices you would give?
So, one is of course to have local people to try to sell. Try to cover a wide area. Don't assume that.
Or cover a specific area. Focus on a specific area rather than spreading yours too wide.
So you need to have, of course, you have to identify which places you want to address first.
This whole thing was first, urban rural was east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. The gaon hamara, shahar tumhara. It has already converged. It will converge more.
Yes.
Which is there.
Yes.
And you need to be on your feet. You need to think, plan global but act local, which is
Yes.
there.
So and I also believe gaon hamara, shahar tumhara will become gaon hamara or shahar bhi hamara.
Gaon bhi hamara or shahar bhi hamara. So village is also mine, and the city is
Yes,
also
I think
mine.
that will be the level of conversion.
That is the level of conviction which is there. So thank you, Shashank. Interesting and insightful. So you've done 3 E's for the audience, at least from my perspective. You have entertained, you have educated, and you have enlightened. So 3 E's, difficult to capture. You try to capture all the 3, which I think you've done successfully. So
Thank
it's very
you so much,
interesting.
sir, for your
and
kind
there will be
words.
some question and answers which will come from the audience. So next time we'll ask the audience to send questions and you'll be answering those questions which is there when
Sure,
we have
I
a
would love to
discussion.
do that.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.